Hi, I'm Tom with a list of interesting things. Today on the list of interesting political things is our third and final Senate prediction video. Before we start, I'd like to let everyone know that I am both testing out a new recording setup and it is currently pouring outside. So if I sound like Mickey Mouse in desperate need of a throat lozenge while standing in a hurricane, that's the reason. But bear in mind further that if my voice comes out a little scratchy, that's no different than it'll sound after all the screaming between now and when polls close. Let's dive right in. For anyone who is unfamiliar and missed our last two prediction videos, the Senate is a collection of 100 individuals that elects two individuals per state. So there's 100 individuals total, and only about a third of them are up for election every year. This year, there's 35 in the Democratic coalition that are not up for election, and 30 in the Republican coalition not up for election. I don't think that anyone's going to complain too harshly as I start to fill in some of these. Sorry, we don't want that tilt Republican. Somebody will get real mad at me if I start characterizing Oregon as a Republican state. We're going to go ahead and hit Oregon, Illinois, because as we know, Chicago is pretty big. We're going to hit Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and Virginia. I'm also going to change the characterization of New Hampshire from likely to safe. And you'll see that pretty consistently as we're moving through this. I'm going to be changing a number of my characterizations that were lean or likely to likely or safe as we start to move a little bit closer to Election Day and as the votes start to get banked from the past couple of weeks of early vote, the chances of a race changing significantly from here are very small. Even if something incredible happens in a race in New Hampshire, a very significant portion of the electorate has already voted, so the chances of those changing are very small. Moving right along to the safe Republican states, we're going to do our standard ones: Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska. We're going to skip over Kansas for the moment. Oregon, Arkansas, Louisiana. We're going to hit Mississippi, Tennessee, and West Virginia. We are going to move Kentucky from the likely red column to the safe red column. If we take a look right here, the projected vote share has Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell up by more than 7 points consistently and gives him a 96% chance of victory. I think it's really safe to put that as safe. Same thing with Mississippi, and we're also going to do the same thing for Alabama. If Doug Jones in Alabama, the current incumbent, had any chance of winning, he would have capitalized on it by now. As near as I can tell, there is really no chance. Tommy Tuberville is very popular. The polls are consistently against Doug Jones in Alabama. And as we can see, Tommy Tuberville is up by a significant margin in the projected vote share and in the polling data. I think it's really safe to say that Doug Jones is not going to win that one. We're going to move right on now to our likely Democrat. Actually, we'll start with our likely Republican states, and I'm really starting to get the sense that I'm slipping into my NPR voice here. I think that's a totally reasonable thing for me to be doing as we start to characterize the first of our Republican likely states. We're going to hit Alaska, South Carolina, and Kansas and Texas. Now, some of these might surprise you. The lack of polling data in Alaska, the extremely spicy Senate race in South Carolina, or the groundswell of support in Texas might lead you to believe otherwise, and that's totally reasonable. But if MJ Hagar was going to narrow the gap, it needed to happen before now. Cornyn in Texas up by 8, Sullivan in Alaska up by 6. I think it's pretty reasonable to say that these are all likely, instead of lean, in favor of the Republican Party. In South Carolina, it is a relatively close race, but Jamie Harrison has been consistently behind the whole race in spite of some tightening up considerably and of some really impressive groundswell support for that race. But with the voter suppression tactics that have been going on in South Carolina and the consistent lead that Lindsey Graham has had, I think it's pretty likely that that's going to go in favor of the incumbent Lindsey Graham. Kansas as well. Barbara Bollier has put up a heck of a fight, but I think it's really safe to say that Roger Marshall is going to end up taking that one when push comes to shove. The polls have been a little all over the place, but if Bollier was going to narrow it up, it needed to happen before now. And finally, in Texas, I think we actually already took a look at it, but we'll take a look one more time. Yep, John Cornyn with a significant lead. We'll move right on to the likely Democratic states, and we're going to see a couple of changes in characterization here, I think. New Mexico, Minnesota, and Michigan, and we're going to add Colorado to that list now. I believe we had New Mexico, Minnesota, and New Hampshire. New Hampshire has been moved up to safe for the Democratic Party, and Michigan and Colorado have both been moved from lean for the Democratic Party to likely for the Democratic Party. Take a look at Michigan. As we can see, same margins in Michigan for Gary Peters as for John Cornyn in Texas. Very significant leads. Take a look at Colorado. Former Governor Hickenlooper, very popular candidate against a relatively unpopular Republican incumbent who has really taken the opposite route to John Cornyn in Texas. John Cornyn has seen, I think, the fading of support for the president in the last, shall we say, year, at least since the beginning of the pandemic, and has moved to distance himself from the president somewhat. Cory Gardner in Colorado has done the opposite and has really tied himself to the president, and I think that that is going to bring him down in the polls overall, and I think we're going to see former Governor Hickenlooper take that with a very comfortable margin. As we can see, he's up by almost 8 points in the projected vote share, and all of the polls have been showing him up by a considerable margin. I think that that's really likely to go for Hickenlooper. And I believe that that's all of our likely states. It certainly is. Moving on now to the lean states. We'll start with the lean Republicans. I believe there's only one. Texas was moved out of the lean column, and I put it into the likely column. The only thing in the lean column now is Montana. I know this will surprise some people, but take a look at this. In the Battle of the Steves, it is a dead heat. Within 3 points, the polls have been pretty up and down. I think that Daines has a significant advantage, but it is by no means a runaway for Steve Daines. So in the Battle of the Steves, I think that Steve Daines will still win, but with a real Democratic wave year, I think that Steve Bullock could do some really great work there. Finally, in the lean column, we are going to click on just 3 states, I believe. Yes, indeed. We're going to click on Arizona, North Carolina, and Maine. Maine is an interesting one. Maine actually sort of surprises me that it is still in the lean blue column. But as you can see, Sarah Gideon has a reasonable advantage. Projected vote share has her up by 2. She's been consistently up in the polls. I had expected it after the Amy Coney Barrett vote, which was one of the most contentious things about incumbent Susan Collins. I had expected it to narrow up considerably, but as we can see right here, it only took a tiny dip. Took a dip by about 4%, and how much in the projected vote share? Let's see if we can see here. It took about a 0.8% shift in the projected vote share there, as you can see. I would have expected it to narrow up quite a bit more, but it seems that that Susan Collins, the incumbent, has really solidified herself as a true red Republican in the minds of the people of Maine, and I think that that will, just like Cory Gardner in Colorado, play to her disadvantage. I think that this vote was a strategic political vote, so as to attempt to win her just that little bit of an edge that she needed to get back in the race, but I don't think that she managed to get it. In North Carolina, This is Cal Cunningham, who has been consistently performing quite well. It has been pretty steady over the course of the race, and I think that it's reasonably safe to keep this in the lean Democratic column, and indeed the last few polls that we are seeing have had Cunningham doing very well with the people of North Carolina. I think that that it's very likely that we will see this as a Democratic seat in January. And finally, you know him, you love him, my boy, noted astronaut Mark Kelly. Check this out. Look at this, Mark Kelly. I am sorely tempted to move this into the likely column, but I'm going to leave it in the lean for right now because, to her credit, Martha McSally has been performing very well. Her fundraising has been doing stellarly, but Mark Kelly, realistically, has got this one locked up. No, you know what? I'm going to do it on the fly. I am so confident in my boy, noted astronaut Mark Kelly, that I'm going to move that into the likely column on the fly. There you go, Mark. My favorite race this year. Absolutely an outstanding and exciting race featuring a man who was quite literally in space. I think that he's got that one locked up, and I think, and we'll touch on this tomorrow when we do our final presidential prediction video, I think that this will do some really great things for Joe Biden in the state of Arizona. I think that Mark Kelly will strongly pull Arizona blue and will really help out the National Democratic Party as they try to make a play for Arizona. All right. Finally, we have the tilt states. What do we have left here? We have Iowa and both races in Georgia. We're going to start with Iowa. Iowa is an odd one. They, as you can see, the polls have been doing this the odds have been doing this interesting sort of dance. As you can see in the last few polls, Ernst has had a little bit of an edge, but I think that this is one that is really, really, really tough to call. I think that if I was forced to, I would, just as I have in the past, give this a pale red vote. I think that we can be pretty safe and secure that Iowa is going to go red, but by a tiny, tiny, tiny margin. Now that being said, if the early vote numbers are any indication, you know what? Actually, before the start of this video, I didn't check. Why don't we check it out? Early vote numbers, Iowa. Actually, didn't check it out before we started this video. Let's take a peek. Let's take a peek here. We'll look at this together. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So we are seeing very significant increases in turnout from speaking of early vote, from 2016, and I was looking at these numbers late last night, and if I recall correctly, they are up by 85%. 85% of total turnout is in Iowa. Don't quote me on that directly. I was looking at it real late. I think with that in mind, we can be reasonably safe in putting this back in the true toss-up column. With it as close as it is, and with mail-in and early vote as strong as it has been, I think that this is just going to be too close to call. We might not see this race called until December, I should say. All right, moving right along. We'll start with the Georgia general. The Georgia general is Perdue versus Ossoff. Perdue is favored, but as you can see, Ossoff performed very well in the debate and more directly. more directly, Perdue did not perform well in the debate. He was actually, in my opinion, in the opinion of many pundits, he performed quite poorly, and he canceled his appearance at the subsequent debate. He went from having a 70-75% chance of winning, and he has dropped down to the high 50s. That is not great. And as you can see, the projected vote share has them within half a percentage point. That is extraordinarily close. I think, though, as we are seeing in South Carolina and in Texas, voter suppression measures have been really, really strong in Georgia. I think that because it's going to be so close, that extra 0.5%, 0.25% will end up swaying it in the direction of the Republican Party. Similarly, in the special election, this is another extraordinarily interesting race. And this is another one where I have said before, I'm going to actively disagree with the polls here. As you can see, Raphael Warnock, ever since they started, instead of polling who's your favorite candidate, the pollsters started polling with runoffs in mind. They started polling such that they could see if it went to a runoff who would win in each matchup. And in each matchup, Warnock consistently won. This may be true, but the special election, which is slated for early January, just to give everyone a refresher course on how special elections work. This is called a jungle election. There are 5 candidates in the race. If no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, then it will go to a runoff with the 2 top vote-getting candidates moving on to the next round. Here's the problem. Democratic turnout, and particularly young turnout, tends to be extraordinarily energetic in presidential elections, but it drops off a lot in midterm elections, such as 2014 and 2010, and it drops off even more than that when there are elections that are not, very heavily popularized, that are like elections that are not scheduled, if that makes sense. So I think that at the special election, those Democrats, those young Democrats who are not extremely engaged, but who come out to vote for Joe Biden, I think that there's a good chance that most of them stay home. And those Republicans who tend to be older, who tend to be more engaged, they do come out in much higher numbers to vote in off-year elections, odd-year elections, and special elections disproportionately. I think that if this goes to a special election, this will go for the Republican Party because the Republican Party will be able to move voter turnout much more easily. Now, it could be the case that I'm wrong. You'll note that when I was talking about midterm elections, I said 2010 and 2014, but not 2018. That's because 2018 saw unprecedented young voter turnout, especially young Democratic voter turnout. If that does happen to occur again, then it could be a blowout in favor of Raphael Warnock, especially considering how popular he is looking. If that happens, I will eat my words, and I will eat my words happily. So, this is our final map. 50-49, with Iowa being an even toss-up. I think that we will have 2 Democratic senators from Georgia when, 2 Republican senators from Georgia when all is said and done, and most of the rest have been moved into likely or safe. I hope that you will all subscribe to stay up to date on all the most interesting things, and I hope that you will check back tomorrow to see our final presidential election prediction video. Hopefully I will have my mic set up in such a fashion that I no longer need to speak in the slow, sultry NPR voice. I hope until next time, you be like the 2020 Senate elections, complicated and ever changing, and above all, I hope you be interesting. See you next time.